Hi everyone and welcome to One for the Music. Today I am joined by composer and musician Jenn Kirby. First of all, Jenn, thank you very much for taking your time and being so open to take part in this project. I'm very glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Okay, so to start this all off, I would ask you to just introduce yourself and give us a bit of a background on your music journey. So where did it all start for you and where you're at now?
Okay, nice opening question. I started, I'll just pick a point. Started my studies not in music actually, but in computer science. And I kind of grew up around a lot of music and certainly engaged in a lot of music. And I decided to keep that going, but I wanted to kind of study computer programming. And after that, I brought in at the start, I think I thought those as quite separate things,
Mhm.
music and computers. And as my kind of studies progressed, I found more and more ways of bringing music into software and into programming. And then when I was deciding on what master's program to go on to, I decided to do music technology in the University of Limerick, and that allowed me to see really what I didn't really know at the time was that how much those two things, those two worlds could be interconnected.
Mhm.
And that was a huge kind of revelation for me. And it was really inspiring in so many ways. And it was exactly what I needed, actually. So I got really excited about different ways of programming sounds from scratch, sound design like that. I didn't realize that those two things could be completely connected. And from there, I was kind of hooked to bringing software and music together. Um, so after that, I went straight to do a PhD in composition, and that wasn't just purely focused on kind of computer music, let's say, but also on instrumental music and lots of other kinds of things. So that was a way for me to explore as broadly as I could in some ways the different themes, I guess, that I was quite interested in musically. So that's kind of what brought me to to make the kind of stuff that I make now, which is I do a lot of kind of electronic music, a lot of live electronic music, and that involves sometimes designing instruments. So designing software instruments, hacking hardware to create new instruments for musical expression, and modifying existing instruments, extending instruments as well. Do a lot of kind of live processing of voice. And it's that allows me kind of to find ways of digging into the sound and to exploring sound in a really different way. And I find that really exciting. I quite like to be diverse, I think, in my practices. So I tell myself that's because if I get bored of one thing, I can always do something else. But I'm not sure if that's really what drives me to do it. But I am interested in lots of different things. So I'm really interested in experimental music, in electronic music. I'm also quite interested in kind of, let's say, avant pop. And just recently I've just finished writing a very short opera as well. So yeah, I absolutely like to get involved in lots of different areas of music, and there's still I've still so much learning and still so much growth, I think, um, in all those different areas. So yeah, that's probably what drives me more than anything else, is what I can learn by engaging in those different things, and it's hopefully a never-ending journey.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So looking at how diverse you are in what you do musically, how would you then define or perhaps interpret your position within the music industry?
Yeah, maybe I wouldn't. um, so Yeah, that's a good question. So I operate in a few different worlds, right? So a few different musical worlds, and a few different kind of scenes, I suppose. Um, and and there's kind of this idea. I heard this actually in my master's, that one of my lecturers had said that there's an idea that if you do lots of different things, then you couldn't possibly be good at all of them, and you must just be good at one. and he was really disputing that and saying, you know, that's kind of nonsense, and that has kind of stuck with me a lot. So I like the idea of maybe not caring so much how good I am at some of the different things, but exploring it because I really want to, rather than I'm good at this, so I should just do this, and I'm not good at that. But actually, these are things that I want to explore. So in so those different musical worlds kind of operate really differently. So because I'm obviously quite interested and engaged in research as well, that involves kind of, you know, traveling to different parts of the world to deliver papers at conferences or do performances at conferences and meet lots of people who are working in these kind of really niche fields as well, which I think is really exciting. I think that's a really fun world to operate in, that I don't think it's always expressed as how fun that is, that you have these people that you get to meet every 2, 3, 4 years at different conferences or different spaces around the world. Now that's a bit more virtually, but that's kind of how I would see engaging in that world. And it's really, there's a strong sense of community and anti-competition, I think, kind of feel to a lot of that, where people are working together and sharing their research, and you learn from everyone else's practices. That's obviously quite a different world to working in kind of more commercial spaces. So I quite like sitting in the middle of those a little bit. So doing performances to people who don't have PhDs and backgrounds in knowing how the stuff works, you know. So
Yeah.
and that's really quite exciting, because it means, for me, the challenge then is try to make it accessible for lots of different people. So if I have you know, people of completely different ages in the audience who can engage with it and enjoy these performances, maybe some people being super technical and wanting to know exactly how it's working, or maybe already knowing how it's working, and other people not caring at all. Like that's a bit of a goal for me, is to actually sit neatly between these kind of worlds, to be able to make it accessible to a wider, just a wider audience. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Now looking at how long you've been making music, being in the industry, what would you say are the major changes or evolutions that you noticed during those years in the industry, and how did you adapt to them?
Okay. I might be really self-centered, but I'm more focused on my the changes to my own practice a little
Hmm.
bit, and I worry a little less about other things, other kind of changes. So the changes then are in those two. Let's say that there's two halves to what I'm talking about. This kind of more experimental way of working and this kind of commercial way of working.
Hmm.
So the changes within an experimental way of working or a research way of working are new ideas that come into the field, and things that are adopted. There's sometimes technological advances, and usually I think what happens is people chase to explore those like really fast, and you think they're going to change everything, and you don't really know until a little bit later what really was that impact, what's going to last from that. And that's really exciting to get engaged with, but it's also good to remind myself, I think, that you don't know yet what the fallout of this is going to be. You don't know how this is going to progress. Don't stress about it too much. And that's kind of a bit on the experimental side. And I always feel that one thing just leads to the other, like this. It's just a constant, just a constant road, I suppose, of discovery. On the commercial side of things, there's obviously huge impacts that happen in the music industries. Again, around technological advances as well. So, you know, if we were talking maybe last year or something, we might talk about how live music is kind of the number one way for musicians to make money, to earn a living. And obviously this year we wouldn't say that, but if we were talking kind of 20 years ago as well, we would have said something different as well. We would have said that that big bands touring and things was not to make money, but to sell CDs.
Yeah.
And so I think knowing that things will change and learning how to adapt to that, and not necessarily knee-jerk response to everything, I think can be helpful. I do think you really have to be aware of what's going on, because there's elements of being able to kind of it's not really capitalize on it, but it's actually be at the forefront of it and be aware and adapt with it and stay current in lots of ways. But I don't think, I think it's still, you have to reflect back on, but is that really what I want to do? Like, you know, you might decide that you're a studio musician and all you want to do is put out like track after track after track, and you've no interest in performing live. And if industry tells you, well, you should perform live, well, maybe you can say, I don't want to. Maybe you can have your own opinion in there. So I think
Yeah.
I would probably encourage people to think that. And that's usually how I think about it. What part of this do I enjoy doing? Because that is certainly, sustainability in your own practice is not just about earning money, but it's actually getting rewards back in your own kind of enjoyment and fulfillment. So you're free to say no sometimes to the music industries.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that approach. Um, I would like to go a bit more into your music and what inspires you to make music. So first off, what would you say are your musical influences?
Okay, it depends a little bit on the different work that I'm doing. Um, so some of those spaces are absolutely overlap, and some of them are really divergent. So I'm quite interested in concepts a lot, and sometimes that isn't necessarily the music that someone produces sonically, but it's their ideas behind it that interest me, and I might do a lot of kind of reading and learning about particular artists because of that.
Mhm.
In other ways, it's purely a sonic experience. So the ones who usually kind of come to mind are, I'm a big Laurie Anderson fan. So, and I think, and I have got a few comments before that definitely comes through in some of the stuff that I do. So um, I'll only see that as a good thing. I've recently only realized that I really I remember hearing Portishead's album Dummy like when I was a teenager, and it having kind of a huge impact, and just listening to it over and over again. And I recently revisited it, and really felt that I had seen a lot of parallels in. I didn't realize how influenced I think I was by it. So that's something, maybe that's something I hadn't realized that I've recently, when I recently listened to, I kind of realized that. So sometimes it's being inspired by everyday life rather than necessarily artists, and sometimes it's being totally inspired by artists. But I don't really have, I think I make a conscious effort to listen to a wide variety of things, not just because of my job, which definitely makes me need to do that as well, but also because I don't want to be shaped too much by listening to potentially copying other artists as well. So I try to listen to quite a diverse range of stuff, and I definitely have a wide range of musical interests as well. So that's not a very solid answer, but I did mention two artists, so I hope that that's sufficient.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes sense to just listen to a wide variety of people. Um, and like you said, sometimes your inspiration might come through in the music you make. So, how would you describe the music that you make personally?
I wouldn't. How would I describe it? God, it depends on it. Like, it depends on what day of the week you ask me in some
Yeah.
ways, and what I can be working on. But I think that no matter actually what I'm doing, no matter what kind of genre or space, or like, you know, even if that's noise music, which I make a lot of electroacoustic music, kind of cheeky tongue-in-cheek electronic, cheesy synth stuff, or silly experimental pop stuff and all. I think there's or even instrumental contemporary classical music, the things, I think there are common threads to all of that, that there is a sense of playfulness in it, and there's always something that's quirky in it, and I don't think I could get away from that if I tried. So when I think about what I actually do, because it's sonically quite diverse, and it's diverse in, I mean, I hope it is. Maybe someone else might listen and say, "No, all your stuff is the same." I don't know, but this is what I feel about it. That even though the outputs are quite different and they work in different spaces, I think the themes are often quite similar. That there is a theme of expression within it. There is a theme of a lot of humor in it. I think, at least I try to have humor in it. I'm not sure how well that lands. And really playfulness. And that's something I hadn't realized how, I mean, you know, maybe sometimes when you do things, you assume that everyone else does that as well. And it was only through kind of conversations really over the past, mainly over the past kind of couple of years, that I've realized not everyone else is playful about the music that they make. And I spend my time like laughing through making music, and I kind of assumed everyone else did, and trying to dispel that myth of tortured artist. And thinking, no, like, if this is what you're going to spend all your time doing, then don't make it a painful process. But I've recently kind of realized that not everyone laughs at what they do, and that's okay. Not everyone thinks it's funny.
But I guess it's always just hard to categorize your music. Just like you said, it's always a different approach to it. But looking at the way you make music, or how you go on about making music, what would you say is your approach to making music? What is your creative process like?
Okay, it depends a little bit on what I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a lot of kind of studio-based composition, and I do a lot of kind of improvised songwriting, which is really fun, and in many ways less about the songwriting itself and more about almost kind of music as therapy. So that's having no ideas and pressing record and just seeing what happens, and that's really fun and a bit scary, I suppose, sometimes. And it's almost like creating, in some ways it's like similar to creating like an audio diary. It's not, because it's not factual or it's not a documentary in any way, but it also but it somehow kind of gives you insight and introspection, I guess. So sometimes that's what I do. Sometimes I'll spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm doing. It, like, if I'm making something a little bit larger, that does need to be considered, and it's not just writing a 3-minute track without thinking about it. Then I will spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'll do a load of reading on it as well, and I'll kind of totally fill my head with everything I can about it, you know, and quite a wide range of different ideas. So a lot of books that are mainly kind of people's ideas and concepts, and just writing that I find really interesting, and I'll read a lot of that, and I might read 3 pages from something, put that down, read a page of something else, and I'll try and just kind of fill my head with lots of ideas. I'll use a whiteboard to work out what I'm doing. I'll spend a lot of time staring out the window, drinking cups of tea, and that's me composing, I think. And that can absolutely be the process. In other ways, if it's designing kind of electronic instruments, or then I might just, if it's with a controller, I might just hold the controller, imagine gesturally how I can play it and what that can sound like. So I'll design an instrument that way, just by pretending the instruments already exist and how I'm going to play it and what happens when I move in a certain way. And then I'll try and imagine, when I'm moving this controller, the data that's being produced. And then I'll go and code what that looks like then. So I'll spend time kind of coding that afterwards. So I usually, with that approach, I think I usually have ideas as to what I'm making first, and then spend a lot of time kind of coding in a Max MSP typically, or something like that. So and that might mean that you produce exactly what you had intended, or that I make a mistake and that gives me a better idea than I had in the first place, and I'll just go with that. And that's, so one of the things that's probably common in all those kind of ways of working is that trying to get into a state of flow. So be that by pressing record and just whatever comes out, or by kind of coding and getting totally lost in that process, or even by kind of composing by staring out the window. And I'll do things like, I'll imagine the end result, you know, like if it's me performing it, I'll imagine it's really helpful for me to have some information about the end result, like where it's going to be. And I'll just imagine that happening, and hearing what it sounds like. and then I'll go, okay, that's what it is, and I'll just try work backwards and write what I imagined. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's less helpful, but it gives me lots of different strategies to try lots of different ways of working, and so it can be quite a cyclical process.
Okay. So in how far would you say is then collaboration? Is it a part of your creative process at all, or is it most of the time only you making music yourself?
Yeah, probably most of the time it is me doing it, but I do collaborate with others as well. I'm doing a lot of that actually, a lot more of that this year. So I do stuff with something called the Swansea Laptop Orchestra, and normally that might be designing a new instrument and then bringing that into the room and playing it and finding new ways of working with it and observing how someone else plays that. And then, so my musical collaborator, like, he'll play it in a different way than what I intended. And that teaches me a lot about how this instrument now works. And then I can go make changes, or he might say things like, oh, can it do this? Why can't it do this? And I'll thought, oh, I've never thought of that. And so that's quite interesting to observe how other people interact with an instrument, especially if you don't tell them how to play it in the first place. That can be really interesting because you can learn a lot about that, of just observing that process. So I find that quite useful at the moment, because obviously collaboration is definitely working differently. I'm doing a lot of those kind of improvised songwriting stuff and just sending that on to someone else for them to make something totally different with it. And that's really fun, because it kind of teaches you to not be precious about your ideas as well, that if you want it a certain way, then do it yourself. If you want to collaborate with someone else, then accept that it's going to be different and it's going to be better because you're working with other people, and it'll give you something that you couldn't have created on your own. So I think that's quite exciting. So that's yeah, sometimes it's long discussions about the meaning of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, and that'll help me kind of shape a piece, so let's say if it's something a bit longer, like if it's a 20-minute piece or something like that, that it might just be literally drawing a kind of graphic score to represent how the piece is going to work over time. That shape and form is quite important to me. So and that might be working with someone else to draw that together and saying we should do this here. And so sometimes it can be, or sometimes it can be completely musical, where you just play and you see what comes from that. So so again, probably lots of different approaches, but I'm not sure if any of that is uniform.
Okay. I think you touched upon it a little. Looking at the current situation right now, and collaboration with COVID going on and the difficulties that come with it. So how would you say that COVID and all of it impacted you on your work as a musician, and also your creative process, perhaps?
Okay. Well, I mean, in a really practical sense of the impact, it's a lot of cancelled projects, a lot of cancelled events. It certainly has made collaboration different and more challenging in one way, but also it's opened up avenues in other ways. So maybe before it wasn't as easy to contact someone, let's say before, to say, do you want to work on something? Here's something to work on. Maybe people didn't feel as comfortable to do that before. I don't know, maybe I didn't. And now I'm kind of happy to reach out to other people and ask them if they want to do things. And I've noticed that a lot of people are reaching out to other people as well to collaborate, because musicians have the time to do that now, whereas they wouldn't before. So I find that quite interesting as an upside, that there are actually more collaborative opportunities. One of the really good things is that while it might have been definitely uncomfortable for people, the benefit afterwards of it's forced a lot of people to up their tech skills, and that has and I think that's certainly costly and it's problematic in lots of ways, but it also brings so much advantages, because I think now people will have different opportunities than they didn't have before, because they weren't good at recording or they didn't have the equipment, and now people are kind of supporting each other through that. And so that means that you can collaborate with people that in ways that you maybe couldn't before, because it was very costly to bring them into the studio. Now people are saying, oh, I've got a mic, I can do this. And you're saying, great, then bring some bring some clothes or something into the room so it dampens the sound or whatever, there's ways that people can work together in a restrictive way that maybe people couldn't have before. So yeah, collaboratively, I've certainly done things where, over Zoom and you're dealing with the kind of latency issues of that. But so it has changed that process, the collaborative process. It has certainly changed my creative process as well. But I think there's a lot of positives in there. I mean, as well as the really obvious downsides that I don't mean to dismiss in any way, like that obviously I have a job, so it doesn't affect me as much as kind of full-time musicians and things like that. So that's a massive problem for musicians and artists, so I don't mean to minimize that, but I'm also just quite interested in some of those upsides at the moment, and I'm hoping that those upsides have a real lasting effect, actually, that people are able to somewhat more autonomous, that people are a bit empowered by kind of having more tech abilities than they had before. And because there's more support for that, it's not that people just didn't bother doing it, it's that maybe there wasn't the time and there wasn't the support. So there, yeah, some of the upsides, I think.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because most of the time you will look at it and look at the downsides of it, of not being able to go to concerts or play concerts, but there's always like a positive side to it, and that's interesting to look at. But what I would like to look at a bit more is another aspect of your work that you mentioned before, your work in the laptop orchestra. I would just like to go a bit more into it and just get a better insight of what you do exactly.
Okay, so I mean, do you want me to tell you kind of technically how things work, or?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay, nice. So there's a few different ways. So there's to give you a little bit of a background, I met Dan Truman, who's a professor at Princeton, while I was doing my PhD in Dublin. I met him there, and he and a group of people set up the Dublin. We set up the Dublin Laptop Orchestra there. So I kind of and he introduced me to a lot of the things that I do now. So that was hugely inspiring, and I've really carried on with a lot of those ideas that I got from Dan and the others that I worked with then. So when I moved to Swansea as well, we set up the Swansea Laptop Orchestra, and so Dan would have set up the Princeton Laptop Orchestra with others like Perry Cook, and the kind of idea was that, I know one of the key ideas was that rather than electronic music where music comes out of a PA system and you don't know who's doing what, the idea was that you had clear reference to who was producing what sound. So even in his setup, he would have, speakers would be by the musician, so it would not be a mono speaker, it would be a spatialized speaker with sometimes like 6 speakers on it, and the idea was that sound would emanate in a way that is similar to like that of a violin or something, that sounds goes out in all directions, and it was to kind of borrow from that world and to bring that into, say, these are individual performers, and I found that really quite fascinating, and it helped to really break through some of the barriers, I think, associated with electronic music. And I mean, they're still there. You still have the thing of, they're checking emails or they're on Facebook or something like that if people are on laptops, and it's still, but by putting it out there as a laptop orchestra, it's almost, it almost feels contradictory to people. And I think it makes people quite interested in it as well. And now, like, we've moved on to lots of other things, to be honest, and laptops are less on stage because there's Raspberry Pis that you can use, there's a bunch of wearables that you can have, and all this kind of other stuff. But the general idea is about creating kind of instruments that are physical, and they are expressive, and there's a connection between what you see and what you hear. So you can see what people are doing. You don't necessarily know how it's being produced, but that's okay. I don't really know exactly how a violin works either, but I understand it gesturally, so I can understand and connect what I see and what I hear, and that's kind of engaging, I think, to the audience. So that's kind of a lot of my research is kind of based on that audience engagement and that performer agency as well. So you have as much agency with an instrument an electronic instrument, that you would with an acoustic instrument, for example. So that's kind of a big research focus for me. So the laptop orchestra, how that kind of works then is that everyone could have a totally independent system, and you have some sort of a controller that is plugged into your laptop or wirelessly connected to your laptop, and when you move it, it sends that data for that movement to the laptop, and you interpret that data and turn that data into music in some way. So in a really simple way, you can say those controllers are similar to a keyboard, like a computer keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
You press keys and things happen. Similar to a MIDI keyboard, notes can send data, like they send pitch data and velocity data, and an instrument responds to that. But when you design kind of your own controllers and your own software, you have a whole host of different ways of controlling things. So maybe I don't want to control pitch and velocity, but maybe I want to control swell of a sound instead. Maybe I want to control how much I pitch shift in real time, or maybe I want to control the amount of delay, or maybe I don't want to control any of those parameters. Instead, I want to play an invisible drum, and I'm going to use a controller to do that. And depending on how quickly I move my hand, that might trigger a drum sound. And depending on where my hand is in space, that triggers a particular drum that I have decided exists in this space, at least imaginatively, and the data corresponds to that. So that's a whole load of ideas. But so another way, that's assuming that everything works separately and you interact with each performer in the same way that you would in any other setting, in any other kind of performance setting. Another way for that to work is that the computers themselves are actually talking to each other as well. So that's really helpful for things that are beat-based and where the timing needs to be really precise. So you might have the computers kind of synced, and we've been able to do this from a large distance as well. Networked performances are a huge thing as well, and you have you have a clock, basically, a metronome that keeps all the computers around the world in sync, so the music that's performed is in time with each other. So for me, it's about allowing the laptop or the computer or the technology to aid you in the performance and aid you in your just in musical performance, I suppose, aid you in the music rather than you facilitating the computer's performance. So it's kind of the you still have enough performer agency so that you are in charge, I suppose, as the performer of the instrument. So I'm not sure if you hadn't seen anything, would that give you any idea as to what it actually kind of looks like? But it can be quite a physical experience. I think there's something about it and equating energy in and energy out. So in the same way that you don't really have to trash the guitar in certain genres for it to sound that way, but it makes sense that you do so. And I think there's something similar with electronic music as well. It's a certain thing that we understand with the amount of energy that goes in and the amount of, let's say, sonic energy that is returned. So.
Okay, great. That sounds like an extremely interesting part of your work. Another part of your work is also being a lecturer at university. And I suppose you do a lot of research, music research. So what I would like to know is, how did you get into it and what fascinates you the most about it?
Okay. So I did a lot of teaching while I was doing my PhD. And I think, like when you try something out, I suppose you quickly know if it's for you or not. You quickly get a sense of, and that's not something you can really know in advance, I suppose. And I absolutely love working with students. I love being part of people's musical journey as well, and just kind of helping people along that journey. I think that's really quite an exciting thing. So I really enjoy that, and it certainly feeds into my practice a lot as well. So that's something that lecturers often tell students, but I never know if students really believe it, you know, that it's not just like lecturers imparting knowledge or anything like that, that it's obviously a very, I mean, it should be, I suppose, a facilitated process in learning rather than here's what I know and I'll just tell you. But the other thing is that we get a lot of ideas back from students as well, and it really informs what we do. So in a similar way that I said, when I design an instrument and I hand it to someone else and I see how they interact with it, that informs my research loads, and it's not that they're doing it right or wrong, it's showing me that's how this person works, and everyone works differently, and it informs what I do. And in the same way, if I share some research with students, and depending on how students kind of receive that and how they discuss that, that informs what I do as well, because everyone has different perspectives and they're really valuable. So that's really interesting, and that's really exciting. Yeah, for me to hear that. So that's one of the ways in which those two worlds connect, my kind of research and practice world to a kind of let's say lecturing world. They're ways that they connect. Yeah, okay. Through kind of reciprocal communication, perhaps.
Yeah. So then, from your perspective as a lecturer, how important would you say is an academic background in music? So how important is it to have a degree to find your way in music, or what are the benefits of it for you personally?
Yeah, it's a good question. People talk about experience and qualifications as being like separate, and I don't really see it like that. You know, that I think the qualification almost kind of rubber stamps your experience of what you've done over however many years on the course. And if you're doing other work, like it's almost that it's experience that's completely designed and condensed. So that's what I think is probably one of the biggest benefits. It's not that you couldn't necessarily, or it's that you can create a portfolio in maybe a much shorter amount of time that's really focused and diverse enough to make sure that, because it's designed to give you all the skills that are needed to work in lots of different areas. But it's mainly, the big thing for me is that it teaches you like how to learn as well. So that's like the most important thing I've learned, I think, is that I'm really good at learning now. So it's not that I know everything, I really don't, but it's that I feel confident that I can learn like a lot of different things. So if I'm introduced to something new, because I've been through this process for so long of learning new things, I'm really good at learning new things fast now, because I've learned the strategies of doing that, and having kind of an openness and a critical awareness to what you're doing, I think is one of the key things that you learn on a degree program. And it's not the stuff that's easily written down as, you know, I now know how to do X, Y, and Z, but it's that I actually have the capacity to learn how to do any of those things. So that they're the kind of reasons that I think that's so important, that that doesn't really get reflected when you say, I have a first class degree in this. It's indicative of certain things. And I think the argument as to kind of competing experience or qualifications against experience it just doesn't make sense to see those things as opposed, and that it's and it's also, it can be like, certainly I found even in my undergrad that there was things at the time that I thought I could see really obviously why I was doing it. It's really clear I need to do this because I will be doing exactly that, like learning a particular programming language. Why are we learning this programming language? Because it's an industry standard. It's easy to convince people. You know, why are we learning management techniques of software engineering? And I sat there going, I have no idea. Like, this is nonsense. And that's how I felt about it at the time. And then, you know, years later, it's the thing that I reflect on most. And thank God I learned so many. I remember him saying that, you know, and I'm thinking about certain things that were said in classes years back and go, that's still relevant, and I'm still using that. So sometimes it can be all the things that you don't necessarily think are important at the time, that they turn out to be the most relevant things later, things that are most useful that you can kind of build upon. So it's not just about I can do X, Y, and Z, but it's I have the capacity to do all of these things now. And that's the stuff that's actually much, much harder to learn. Because it has to, you literally are changing your brain, like how your brain works. You're developing new pathways to different things, and that's I often find that, or I often think that doing that is like it's like stretching an elastic band. That every time it's that resistance, and it always feels, every year in university feels challenging because you're always just pushing beyond your limits a bit. But then the act of stretching the band itself makes it easier to stretch next time, because you've been through that process, you know how to do that, and you're able to go through that over and over again. You're able to take a challenge, you're able to, for someone to ask you for a piece of work, say, I need this from you, and you're thinking, your immediate response is, oh my God, I have no idea how to do that. And then you remind yourself, yeah, the last time that happened, I figured it out though. So they're the kind of things, that's how I think about it anyway.
Yeah, I agree with it. Yeah, makes 100% sense. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Now that we're coming to an end, I thought as a last question, it might be interesting to get some more advice from you. So my question would be, for upcoming artists, what advice would you give them in their career, in their steps making into the music industry?
Okay, that is a good question. I think the first thing I would do is ask a lot of questions first, right? So I don't think I can give blanket advice,
Yeah,
because everyone's experience is different. And if I just tell you, you should do this, I assume certain values, I assume certain goals. So I would probably go against that. So maybe then my advice is probably have a think about what you want, and don't worry as much about what's expected of you. But knowing what you're interested in, and even the music that you want to make, I think is quite important. I did hear good advice before that was, find a corner that no one's operating in and make that yours. I thought that was interesting. I don't think I would relay the same thing, but I would certainly say, have a think about the stuff that's interesting to you and what you want to do. And okay, another piece of advice that I have heard was also, have I think it was something like, have a fan base of one, guaranteed fan base of one.
yeah,
So if you, and that resonated quite a lot with me actually, that if you do something that you're really happy with, everything else is transient, so it might be really in and you might get lucky and everyone else loves this kind of stuff at the moment, and then it might be gone in a month's time or in 10 years time or whatever. But that should never be reduced down to less than one. So if you're making something that you don't like that everyone else does, then that feels just less important to me. So I think that is good advice that I've heard that I would relay is, yeah, having an audience of one is something that you can certainly build upon, but it should be the starting point, perhaps.
yeah, I like that. So that seems to be an amazing statement to round it all up. So what I can say for now is thank you so much for taking your time. It was really interesting talking to you, getting an insight on your music, but also your viewpoints on music, on the music industry. And yeah, thank you so much for taking your time and being here today.
Bob, thanks, Kino. I appreciate it.
All right, so this has been One for the Music for today. I'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.